Hi everyone, Alexa here from the blog Duvallhomestead.com. Today I'm going to show you how to make same-day sourdough bread. If you thought that you needed to be some kind of magician to make bread rise on your own and to do it quickly, that is not true. I've learned over the many years of cooking sourdough that not only is sourdough something that anyone can do, but also you can actually do it in one day, which is kind of new to me when I figured this strategy out a few months ago due to me never remembering to start my bread when I needed to start it and me just saying this bread is gonna have to rise today and making it work just fine. So I'm gonna share that strategy with you today. Spoiler alert, it's a lot easier than you might think. I will have the recipe for both of the loaves that I'm going to be showing you today in the description below. I also have a sourdough book that has over 30 tried and true sourdough recipes, and I will leave a link to that below if you are a sourdough baker and you want to make everything sourdough and you just want a place to start in terms of recipes. Okay, so moving on to the recipe. So you're going to see me here making two different loaves of bread. I'm going to show you today how to make a boule loaf and then also a sandwich loaf. Now I want to talk about sourdough starter really quick because you might be thinking, if you're making it in one day, then are you using sourdough discard or are you using fed starter? The answer is it should be fed starter. However, if you are someone who has been making sourdough for a long time and your starter is strong and it's only been not fed for a few days, then I would say you can go ahead and use that quote discard for this recipe because when you make bread, you are actually feeding the starter. So of course it's going to reactivate. However, if you have not fed your starter in a month and it's just totally dead, or you have a brand new starter, I would not suggest doing this. When I had my first starter, I remember the difference it made when my starter was actually fed and active. All of that to say, I prefer to use a fed active starter. So to bake sourdough bread in one day, I'm gonna feed my starter the night before. So it's really easy, just before bed, I'm gonna add some flour and water to my starter so that when I wake up in the morning, I'm going to bake it in one day. Now, if I had forgotten to do this, I could wake up in the morning and just use my discard because I have a really strong starter that's been around for so many years, almost a decade, and it would be fine, but I'm just making that point. Anyway, the recipe for bread that I usually use is about 3/4 cup starter, 1.5 cup filtered water, 1.5 teaspoons salt, and then about 4 cups of flour. Now, this recipe might vary a little bit based on your flour, your starter consistency. I feed my starter with 1 cup flour, 3/4 cup water. The most important thing to remember about sourdough is that it takes practice. Watching videos like this, watching what the dough should look like, and then looking at your dough and thinking, oh, I think I need more water or I think I need more flour. That's the best way to learn, is just to experiment. So what you're gonna see me doing here is making the dough early in the morning and letting it sit throughout the day. So I'm gonna do stretch and folds, which is where you lift up one part of the dough and then you fold it over the center of the dough and then rotate the bowl, do the same thing, lift up, fold over the center, rotate it 4 times till you've done all 4 sides have been lifted and folded. This is developing the gluten in the dough, and this is what will make it rise. Now, during the day, the most important thing you can do is keep your bowl with the dough in it warm. Now, this recipe is a little bit different for the sandwich loaf. I'm gonna add butter to that one and olive oil. Again, I'll leave the recipes below. But the process for each loaf is going to be the same. So throughout the day, my secret to making this work is to keep these dough balls in the back of my stove where I'm cooking. So I cook 3 meals a day. I use my oven a lot. I have a vent over here behind my burners where the hot air comes out of my oven. So if you're not actually cooking, you could just turn the oven on, and I've done this. I just turn the oven on 400 degrees for about 30 minutes or so, and it just warms this area up and it blasts heat onto my bowls and it makes my dough rise quickly. So if you are finding that your dough is not rising, it's not coming together like it should, like you see in this video, you need to add more heat. Another thing you could do is turn your oven on at 300 degrees or maybe 250. Once it reaches that 250, turn it off. Open it up, let it air out a little bit so it's not piping hot, and then put your bowl in there for a little while. Now monitor it, because if it gets too hot, it will over ferment and you don't want that. I'm gonna perform about 3 stretch and folds throughout the day, about 2 hours apart. So I started this dough early in the morning. I'm gonna do stretch and folds every 2 hours, and then I'm finally going to shape this dough around 4 p.m. in the afternoon. Once you shape your dough, this is the last step. You're gonna put it into its final shape. Now this looks different whether you're doing a sandwich loaf or a boule. So for a boule, you're gonna keep it round, use your hands, cup like this in a C position on both hands. Make circular motions with the dough. Bring it forward and then back towards you, forward and back towards you. What you're doing, and this is on a clean countertop surface, is creating tension in the bottom of the dough so that it can kind of spring up. For the sandwich loaf, I'm actually going to roll it out into more of a log shape and then bring the edges together and pinch them along the top to seal the bottom of the dough. This step is really important. You want to create your dough, shape it, and then let it sit for as long as possible. So you'll know when your dough's ready because it will double in size. I've actually over fermented my doughs even in this same day recipe because they're so warm. So for me, if I'm cooking on the stove while doing this, my dough can actually get too warm. So just be aware that you're not lighting it on fire because the heat is absolutely what will make your dough rise quickly. So if I'm cooking a lot and the oven is on and it's just super hot, I'll have to move my bowls somewhere else just to slow them down a little bit. So if I make my dough around 4 p.m., I'll probably bake it around 9 p.m. So I let that sit for about 5 hours in its final position. But again, don't get too concerned with the amount of hours that's in a recipe or that I'm saying right now, because it's more about keeping an eye on your dough and seeing when it doubles in size, you can clearly see that it has risen and it's ready to go. So I'm gonna bake these loaves after we have put our kids to bed. And the last step is, what do you do once they're out of the oven because now it's late at night? Well, for me, what I do is I just leave them uncovered on my counter all night. And then in the morning, I will cover them up with plastic. This is because the bread is gonna stay so warm that you don't wanna put it in a bag or anything like that because the warmth will create moisture and then you'll be having your bread sit with moisture on it in a bag all night long, and that will create mold. So you have to kind of let it air out. Now, that's totally fine. It's not gonna dry your bread out. I do it every single week, multiple times a week. Just don't cut the bread open. So this recipe assumes you're not gonna be eating it that night. So if you're baking it late at night, don't cut it, just let it sit overnight, and then in the morning it's ready to cut and ready to store in plastic or however you store your bread. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this tutorial on how to make same-day sourdough bread. I hope this was helpful for you. I know that I wish I would have known this recipe almost 10 years ago when I started making sourdough, but you live and learn, and sourdough is a process that does take a while to learn and experiment with. So I hope that you can experiment with this and that you let me know in the comments below how this works for you. It is a game changer when you realize you don't have to long ferment your bread in the fridge overnight. That process does not actually need to occur. If you're brand new around here, I'd love if you would join me every week for farm to table recipes and homemade natural living by hitting that subscribe button. Don't forget to check out the description below for the recipes and grab a copy of my Sourdough at Home ebook. Thank you so much for stopping by the Duvall Homestead.